Hello everyone and welcome to the Kingdom of Thailand. I hope you're having an amazing day, because if you're having an amazing day, I'm having an amazing day. If I'm having an amazing day, you should be having an amazing day. This weekend, I've decided to run away from the brutal capitalist dictatorship of Kuala Lumpur to the more peaceful, serene and civilized region of Krabi in Thailand, which is basically the southernmost region of Thailand. And I must say, I like it a lot. Well, my hotel is located in the Ao Nang district, which is one of the liveliest areas in Krabi. And it reminds me a lot of Bukit Bintang in Kuala Lumpur. It's very, very similar to Bukit Bintang in many respects. The Ao Nang area is mostly tourists, mainly from the Western world, but you know, there are a couple of Malaysians like myself, a couple of Malaysians who want to escape from the stifling capitalist dystopia of Kuala Lumpur and come to some place where there's a soul, at least, you know. But for the most part, it is fundamentally meant to cater to expats and foreign tourists. So you're not going to meet many locals here on a person-to-person basis, because you can see this is very much like a pocket in Thailand. Well, in the same way that Kuala Lumpur is a pocket in Malaysia and Shanghai is a pocket in China, Ao Nang is itself a pocket in Thailand. So those of you who say that I should be married by now, would I be able to do this if I were married with children, living my best life right now? I don't think so. Well, as you can see, Krabi is a stunning place. It's really no wonder that tourists from all corners of the world flock to this beautiful region in Thailand, which is basically one of the most famous tourist destinations for people who love beaches. When I say love beaches, I really mean it. Yes, this is one of the most popular tourist destinations for beach lovers and for island hoppers as well. If you want to experience the more rustic and rural sort of life that you came all the way here for, I'd suggest taking a drive out of the city centre towards a more rural part. I'm actually in a village somewhere in the mountainous regions of Krabi, which is about 30 minutes away from the city centre. Yes, and you can see there's a very, very stark contrast, a very, very clear juxtaposition between the city centre and the rural regions. Well, one thing you might notice is that it's much more quiet, but another thing you might notice is that it's a lot more peaceful. Yes, you're not surrounded by people. It doesn't feel so claustrophobic. And you don't see a single foreigner in sight, which is a refreshing change for me. No offense to expats. But the point is, look, I myself too am a foreigner. Look, there is a stark juxtaposition in the expat or the foreigner experience in Southeast Asia and the reality of day-to-day life of the people who serve these foreigners, who serve these tourists, who serve these expats, who, when they were in their own countries, they were the struggling proletariat. But when they came to Southeast Asia, suddenly they became the labor aristocracy, and they live far better than the locals do. Expats live in a very, very protected bubble. This is really how most of the country really is. In most Southeast Asian countries, including my native Malaysia, I've been trying to say that expats live in a very, very isolated and atomized bubble. So when expats make videos, for example, explaining or to the world and telling the world how great and developed a Southeast Asian country is, or how great and developed any country they visit is, really, you have to take what they say with a pinch of salt, because they are describing a very, very select region of said country, which caters to expats from the global north. It's kind of like how Shanghai is a pocket in China, the same way Kuala Lumpur is a pocket in Malaysia, because most of Malaysia is really much like this. Most of Malaysia is underdeveloped, rural, and really, really in need of industrialization. But the same could be said of Thailand as well. But the point is, when expats tell you about a place, when they give you a picture of a place, rather, well, what they're giving you, the picture that they're giving you is really a rose-tinted sort of picture of said place. Look at the mountains behind me. Isn't Thailand beautiful? Yes, it's a very beautiful place, no doubt. People are wonderful as well. But at the very same time, I need to make it very, very clear that as a visitor to Thailand, as a tourist, I'm cognizant of the privileges that I have coming from Malaysia, for example, that I should not take for granted. And I feel that many foreigners, many expats, many tourists from more affluent countries often take these privileges that they have for granted. And it never occurs to them, not saying that they're bad people, they're not, but it never occurs to them to try and actually see the other side of the society they're living in. Because as far as they're concerned, they escaped the material conditions of whatever Western country they came from, and as a result, they don't seem to realize that they have become the labor aristocracy in whichever country that they visit. Not faulting them for that. It's normal for everyone to want to improve their material conditions. But the point is, we need to be aware of the tourist industrial complex. Well, my hotel is located in the Ao Nang district, which is one of the liveliest areas in Krabi. And it reminds me a lot of Bukit Bintang in Kuala Lumpur. It's very, very similar to Bukit Bintang in many respects. The Ao Nang area is mostly tourists, mainly from the Western world, but you know, there are a couple of Malaysians like myself, a couple of Malaysians who want to escape from the stifling capitalist dystopia of Kuala Lumpur and come to some place where there's a soul, at least, you know. But for the most part, it is fundamentally meant to cater to expats and foreign tourists. So you're not going to meet many locals here on a person-to-person basis, because you can see this is very much like a pocket in Thailand. Well, in the same way that Kuala Lumpur is a pocket in Malaysia and Shanghai is a pocket in China, Ao Nang is itself a pocket in Thailand. Don't get me wrong, Thailand is a really nice place. It is. But having said that, even though it is a nice place, there is a dark undertone beneath this veneer of fun and frivolity. You might remember last year I made a video that was entitled Commodity Fetishism, basically dispelling the myths of what commodity fetishism really is. and talking about the fact that people often don't realize the high cost of cheap goods. But today's video is going to be commodity fetishism in the tourism industry, or commodity fetishism in the expat industry, because many people do not understand that commodity fetishism, in a word, can also extend beyond a localized context, meaning there are situations or there are circumstances in which you can see commodity fetishism being practiced on a day-to-day basis. When you visit a hotspot tourist destination like Thailand or Vietnam or Indonesia even, behind everybody's dream vacation is a dark truth that nobody wants to talk about. But it is an ugly truth that needs to be brought up nonetheless. Now, one of the first things any Malaysian will experience when they come to Thailand is the sudden realization that your ringgit suddenly goes a long way. And it's the very same thing, really, with people, expats from Western countries, when they come to Malaysia. Suddenly, their dollars or their pounds go a very, very long way. And then, now, we come to the obvious question of, why is that the case? Why are some countries less developed than others? Why are some countries, for example, in different stages of development? Or let me rephrase that. Why are different countries in different stages of development? Well, if you believe what Lee Kuan Yew says, Lee Kuan Yew will simply say that, anybody who's not an East Asian has simply failed to make the grade. Even though Lee Kuan Yew's country is very dependent on laborers from Bangladesh and maids from the Philippines. The economy is built up on not just the labor of the Singaporean proletariat, but the underclass of foreign workers from Philippines and Bangladesh, who are basically an underclass of proletariat. And you could say that if you're going to rank the Singaporeans in terms of tiers, the expat, the white expat from a Western country is probably the labor aristocracy. The Singaporean white-collared worker is the mid-tier proletariat. The lower-tier proletariat is the Singaporean blue-collar worker. And then you've got the foreign workers from Philippines or Bangladesh, less developed countries, through no fault of their own, of course. So why is this? We have to get to the obvious question, and Lenin explains it to us, really, in his book, Imperialism is the Highest Stage of Capitalism. If you read Lenin is basically the 20th century extension of Marx. In a nutshell, the old capitalism, which tends to be a localized form of capitalism, according to Lenin, is a dead, outmoded form of capitalism. The new capitalism doesn't only involve exploitation on a local scale, but also exploitation on a global scale. So, according to Lenin, and this is also supported by Marx, it is the pursuit of profit that drives the bourgeoisie or the business class to all corners of the globe. And eventually, when they realize that they've reached a plateau in their own country, that's when they start expanding in other countries, basically. And the most ruthless capitalists realize that they can actually use the power of a gun, the power of strong armed politics, in order to coerce weaker nations into giving them cheap labor and giving them resources that they could not get in their own countries. The demands of the Industrial Revolution that the capitalists of the Western world had to fulfill was basically what drove what we call the great game of imperialism. Essentially, it was the science of the Industrial Revolution that gave birth to the car tire. But you cannot produce car tires without a particular resource known as rubber, which is a resource that you find in Southeast Asia. Yes, there are thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of rubber trees in Southeast Asia. So basically, what you have to do is to tap the resin from the tree. And the resin drips out into this cup. Now, this is very laborious work. Rubber tappers work extremely long hours and they do extremely laborious work, and they subject themselves to the most dangerous of creatures like snakes and all sorts of other wild animals. And it is this resource, this commodity, from which car tires are produced. You cannot produce car tires without rubber, you see. So there's no point having all the science of the Industrial Revolution if you don't have the means by which to utilize it. And that is what drove the Europeans to Asia and Africa, because Europe, for all intents and purposes, was not really geographically blessed. Sure, it had the Enlightenment after the Renaissance period, but it didn't have a bountiful amount of resources. The Europeans may have come up with the science in order to do capitalism first. However, they were not geographically blessed in that they didn't have enough resources, or they didn't have the right resources in order to apply their science. And, well, the fact of the matter is that Asia, although less scientifically advanced in comparison, was bountiful with these commodities, these natural resources for commodity production. So what better way in order to advance the Industrial Revolution, or to advance the growth of capital, than by using one's diplomatic and military might in order to subjugate the rest of the world. Keep the rest of the world poor for Europe to advance. The pursuit of profits basically causes the bourgeoisie, or the owners and financiers of capital, to chase resources and cheap labor all across the globe. So if you're wondering why the British were in Malaya, the answer to that question is that they were basically answering a demand. They were answering the demands of the Industrial Revolution, which basically required raw materials that were not available in Britain, such as timber, rubber, palm, pewter, copper, and tin, which were readily available in Southeast Asia. So, basically, the world in the new form of capitalism was basically split into two parts of the world. Not geographically, so to speak, but rather in terms of development. The global north and the global south. Now, the global north are basically developed countries, mostly in the Western world, with the exception of countries like Japan, South Korea, and Singapore, which are adjacent to the Western world. These countries are basically the countries that developed technologically first, which enabled them to conquer and subjugate weaker countries. And the global south is basically most countries in Southeast Asia, Africa, as well as many countries in the Middle East. But Malaysia and Singapore are basically neighbors. They used to be one country at one point, but there was a split in 1965. Singapore should geographically be considered a global south country because Singapore is the neighbor of Malaysia. But because of its adjacency to the West, its adjacency to the owners and financiers of imperialist capital, Singapore counts as a global north country, while Malaysia counts as a global south country. Now, of course, the popular argument among Western reactionaries, including Lee Kuan Yew, is that global north countries simply have people with better DNA and better work ethic, and global south countries have people with, with inferior DNA and inferior work ethic. That's the Lee Kuan Yew school of thought, the Cambridge school of thought from the 1940s. But if you see just how hard people in Thailand work, how hard people in rural Malaysia work on a day-to-day basis, yet their material conditions don't seem to be improving. They haven't seemed to have improved over the last couple of decades, while certain regions which cater to lots of expats get developed very, very well. It tells me that it's more than just a matter of a cultural problem. Now, make no mistake, the Global South does have a cultural problem, but it's not the cultural problem that you think it is. The cultural problem of the Global South is not that the people are lazy and incompetent, but rather that their leaders choose to maintain adjacency with the owners and controllers of capital. Their leaders keep the people poor through constant exploitation and theft of wealth, through corruption, like, for example, Ferdinand Marcos in the Philippines was a huge thief. And also the fact that the Global South, many countries in the Global South, even those that were not directly colonized, like the country I'm in right now, for example, have proven to be more than willing, not the people, mind you, but the leadership, have proven to be more than willing accomplices towards the Western imperialists or the Western capitalists. Now, just because you come from a global north country, it doesn't necessarily mean that you are a beneficiary of imperial loot. Of course, America got to enjoy its, white picket fence sort of lifestyle. At least a certain strata of Americans got to enjoy that lifestyle, not because of some inherent superiority in the culture and work ethic and DNA of the Americans, but rather because America had emerged the victor of the Second World War. Well, even though it was the Soviets who defeated Hitler, America was in a very, very good position after the Second World War. And America was also in a very good position at the end of the Korean War. So basically, because of imperial plunder, because of America's imperial plunder in Asia, it was able to enjoy a window of prosperity for a time, a halcyon time that people like to look back to, and they like to wishfully say that, oh, if only we could go back to those days. But those days are like toothpaste out of a bottle. You can't get them back anymore. The point is, the Americans, I understand, and the British and the Australians, the Canadians, or the French or the Italians, anyone from the Western world really, are not necessarily beneficiaries of imperial plunder, because there are always going to be an underclass of people. There's always going to be an underclass of people, even in global north countries. I understand, not all Americans have money. Not all British people have money. When I was in London last year, I saw more beggars than I did in the streets of Kuala Lumpur. On the streets of Kuala Lumpur, sorry. And it's clear to me that the decline of the global north and the rise of the global south will be sending an exodus of people from those countries, the global north I mean, to the global south, in order to seek a better standard of living. And I don't blame you for that. But having said that, however, certainly many people from the global north end up unknowingly or knowingly becoming the labor aristocracy of the global south. That means a class of workers, because they don't necessarily own capital, but a class of workers that lives far better than people in the global south. They live far better. They were exploited proletariat in their own countries, but when they came to the global south, suddenly they live far better than the people serving them their food, and the people who prepare their drinks for them, and the people who manage their hotels for them. This is the conditions that those people, these are the conditions that those people have to go back to, you see. Now, whether that's Kuala Lumpur we're talking about, or whether we're talking about the more tourist-packed regions of Thailand, like this place, for example, the fact is that this is not an actual reflection of how the average Thai person lives, in the sense that these are places where people with a certain spending power are able to come and spend money, and the average local working in these places is basically alienated from the very things that they produce, the very things that they produce, such as the food in these restaurants, or the services that they offer to the tourists and expats. That is to say, the average local does not have the buying power that the labor aristocracy in this area has. You know, it's easy to understand why countries like Thailand are popular with tourists from the global north. Because, like I said, even in Malaysia, I feel, even though Malaysia is not a global north country, I feel that my dollars can go a lot further, or my Malaysian ringgit can go a lot further in Thailand than it ever can in Kuala Lumpur. For once in my life, I actually feel that, you know, I don't have to pinch pennies and count however much I'm spending, because my Malaysian ringgit actually stretches over here. So I can only imagine how someone from the global north suddenly realizing, oh, I can basically live very well in the global south. Well, you basically feel, suddenly you feel like a king or a queen. And it's important to realize that there is a cost to this. Localized exploitation means when the proletariat is exploited by the bourgeoisie. Now basically, localized exploitation is fundamentally, of course, felt on a local level. Meaning that the bourgeoisie, or the business class, enjoys a standard of living that the proletariat can only dream of because of the proletariat's labor, basically. And it is it's basically the localized form of this. But I think there are many contradictions of class society that extend beyond simply the exploitation of the proletariat and the bourgeoisie on a local level. You know, just like Marx himself said that at one end of the pole is wealth, and at the other end of the pole is misery and suffering. So on a localized level, you can talk about the wealth of the capital owning class and the suffering, juxtaposed with the suffering and the misery of the class that owns no capital. But just like how Engels extended the bourgeoisie and the proletariat theory to men and women as well, describing men as the gender bourgeoisie and women as the gender proletariat. Now this is debatable. It's not really the point of this video to bring up this debate, whether this is true or not. I think that you can also extend this concept towards people from global north and global south countries, or countries that are somewhere in the middle between the global north and the global south, like Malaysia, for example. Well, from my perspective, I would say that we tourists, or we expatriates or tourists, are part of the labor aristocracy in these global south countries. We are. If you want to extend it further and say that we are like the bourgeoisie who benefit off the cheap labor and the fact that and the weak currency of these countries, you can also say that. But you cannot deny the fact that, you know, there is a strata of people. We are the strata that lives better than the vast majority of people in this country. And it's not because the vast majority of people have a cultural problem. It's not that they are lazy or they are incompetent. That's not the case. What has happened is simply a very, very disparate or a very, very uneven development, uneven bell curve of development of nations that have occurred due to various historical factors. And people always talk about the global south, at least people in the global north, they always talk about the global south in such a disdainful way. Like they say, why can't these countries simply develop? What is wrong with them? Do they have a cultural problem? No, these countries do not have a cultural problem. You know what they are? These countries are, for lack of a better term, overexploited. Yes, there are no poor people in this world, there are only overexploited people. And that extends collectively towards countries as well. There are no countries in the world that are poor, there are no countries in the world that are lazy. There are simply countries which are unfortunate, having an unfortunate history and an unfortunate populace who happens to have, through no fault of their own, been thrust into circumstances beyond their control, but are trying their best to make it out of poverty. But when countries actually develop, and then they develop hard power, actual hard power through the barrel of the gun, well, suddenly they become less appealing to us tourists, and suddenly those countries start getting called dictatorships like China. So you just can't win. But if you ask me, you know, that doesn't, I'm not saying that you don't need any soft power. You do. But having said that, however, the message of this video is not really to shame anyone into not visiting these lovely tourist destinations. But if you truly love Asia, if you truly love any country in the global south, if you think the people are polite, kind, respectful as they should be, and you want the best for these people, I'm not saying don't come and visit these countries. But remember that there is a cost for your comfort. There is a human price to be paid for the fact that you enjoy everything on the cheap. And what I'm saying is, if you love these countries, push for socialism. Endorse a socialist system in these countries. So at the risk of sounding like a Trotskyist, I'm going to say that if you love the global south, if you truly love the global south and don't just regard it as a playground or a place to come and enjoy your life and escape the alienation of your capitalist society for a few days or a few weeks, if you truly love the people of the global south, support their revolutionary struggle in their endeavor towards a socialist society. Support the proletariat in achieving their historical role of overthrowing the bourgeoisie or the business class in their own countries. And support the national liberation movements of countries in the global south, which are fighting to get the boot heel of imperialism off their throats so they can develop. If you truly love the people of the global south, fight for their emancipation from capital, imperialism, and exploitation on all fronts. But having said that, I want you to enjoy the rest of your trip, and I hope that you have a great time in Southeast Asia. Thank you very much, and have a wonderful day.